Have you ever heard a story that made your skin crawl on a rainy night? It was a crisp autumn evening, the air thick with the scent of fallen leaves and pumpkin spice. Kids in costumes roamed the streets, their laughter echoing through the neighborhood. But as the sun set, an eerie silence fell over our small town. I was home alone, handing out candy to trick-or-treaters. The doorbell rang, and I opened it, expecting to see more costumed children. Instead, I found myself face to face with a figure that made my blood run cold. It stood there, motionless, shrouded in tattered clothes that seemed to belong to another century. Its face was hidden beneath a worn, cracked mask. But what struck me most were its eyes, glowing with an otherworldly light filled with rage and hunger for vengeance. I slammed the door shut, my heart pounding in my chest, but as I turned around, I saw it standing in my living room. How did it get inside? I blinked and it vanished. Was I losing my mind? My phone buzzed. It was a text from my best friend, Mike. "Something weird is happening. Meet me at the old cemetery. Now." I hesitated. The old cemetery had always given me the creeps, but curiosity got the better of me. I grabbed my jacket and headed out. The streets were deserted now. No kids, no parents, just an unsettling stillness. As I walked, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Shadows seemed to move in the corners of my vision, always disappearing when I turned to look. The cemetery gates creaked as I pushed them open. Tombstones cast long shadows in the moonlight. I found Mike standing by an ancient grave, his face pale with fear. "Jack," he whispered, "do you remember the story of Thomas Blackwood?" I nodded slowly. Every kid in town grew up hearing about Thomas Blackwood, a man wrongly accused of witchcraft and executed centuries ago. Legend said he cursed the town with his dying breath, vowing to return and seek revenge on the descendants of those who wronged him. "I think," Mike's voice trembled, "I think he's back." A cold wind whipped through the cemetery, carrying whispers that made my skin crawl. The ground beneath our feet began to tremble. We ran. Out of the cemetery, through the empty streets, our footsteps echoing in the night. But no matter how fast we moved, it felt like something was always right behind us, reaching out with icy fingers. We burst into Mike's house, slamming the door behind us. His parents were out of town, leaving the place eerily quiet. We tried to catch our breath, to make sense of what was happening. That's when we heard it. A slow, heavy footstep on the porch. Then another. The floorboards creaked under an unseen weight. Mike's eyes widened in terror. "My family," he whispered. "They're descendants of Judge Samuel Carter. He presided over Blackwood's trial." The door handle turned slowly. We backed away, our hearts pounding so loud I was sure the revenant could hear them. The door swung open, revealing the same figure I'd seen earlier. Thomas Blackwood stepped into the house, his presence filling the room with an unnatural chill. The mask he wore seemed to shift and change, reflecting the faces of all those who had wronged him centuries ago. He raised a spectral hand, pointing at Mike. "Your blood," his voice rasped, "like dry leaves scraping against stone, will pay for the sins of your ancestors." I didn't think, I just acted. Grabbing a fireplace poker, I swung it at the revenant. It passed right through him, the metal turning ice cold in my grip. Blackwood turned his gaze on me. "You dare interfere?" The room began to spin, reality warping around us. Suddenly, we weren't in Mike's house anymore. We were standing in the town square, surrounded by a jeering crowd dressed in colonial garb. I realized with horror that we had been transported back in time, to the day of Thomas Blackwood's execution. We watched, helpless, as he was led to the gallows, all the while maintaining his innocence. As the noose was placed around his neck, Blackwood's eyes locked onto ours. "Now you will witness the injustice," he growled, "and carry the weight of your ancestors' sins." The trapdoor opened, and Blackwood fell. But instead of hanging, his body dissolved into a swirling mass of darkness that rushed towards us. We were back in Mike's house, the revenant looming over us. "Your time has come," he hissed. In that moment I understood. The cycle of vengeance would never end unless someone broke it. "Wait," I shouted. "We're not our ancestors. We can make this right." Blackwood paused, his form flickering. I pressed on, my voice shaking. "Let us clear your name. Tell your story. Make sure everyone knows the truth." For a long moment, silence hung in the air. Then slowly the revenant nodded. "You have until next Halloween," he warned. "Fail, and my vengeance will be complete." With a gust of wind, he vanished, leaving behind only the lingering scent of decay and a mission that would change our lives forever. As dawn broke, Mike and I looked at each other, still shaken but determined. We had 1 year to uncover centuries-old secrets, to right a historical wrong, and to put a restless spirit to peace. The Revenant's revenge had been postponed, but the clock was ticking. And I couldn't shake the feeling that Thomas Blackwood would be watching our every move, waiting to see if we would keep our promise or suffer the consequences of our ancestors' sins. I've always been a dog person. Cats were never my thing. Too aloof, too unpredictable. But when my daughter begged us to adopt that sleek black cat from the shelter, how could I say no? If only I'd known then what that decision would cost us. My name is David, and this is the story of how a simple act of kindness unleashed a nightmare beyond imagination. It was a rainy Tuesday when we brought Luna home. That's what my daughter Sarah named her. The cat seemed normal enough at first. Quiet, well-behaved, but there was something about its eyes. Too knowing, too intense. I tried to shake off the feeling, telling myself I was just being paranoid. The first night, I woke to find Luna sitting on my chest, staring down at me. I could have sworn its eyes were glowing, but when I blinked, everything looked normal. Just a cat being a cat, right? Wrong. So very wrong. It started small. Things going missing. Keys, socks, Sarah's favorite toy. We blamed it on forgetfulness, on the cat playing with things. But then the whispers began. Late at night, when the house was quiet, I'd hear a woman's voice. Soft, barely audible, but definitely there. It seemed to be coming from wherever Luna was. I'd get up to check, heart pounding, only to find the cat curled up, seemingly asleep. Sarah started having nightmares. She'd wake up screaming about an old woman with glowing eyes like Luna's. My wife, Karen, was skeptical at first, but even she couldn't deny the strange things happening in our home. One morning, we woke to find all the mirrors in the house shattered. In the fragments, I swear I saw a face that wasn't mine. An old woman, her eyes burning with hatred. That's when Luna spoke. Not in meows or purrs, but in English, with the voice of the old woman from my daughter's nightmares. "You've ignored me long enough," it hissed. "It's time you knew the truth." We stood there, frozen in shock and fear, as Luna, or whatever was possessing her, told us a tale of centuries past, of a witch named Agatha, wrongly accused and executed, of a curse placed on her familiar, a black cat, doomed to wander until it found a family to carry out Agatha's final wish. "You will help me," the voice growled, "or you'll suffer a fate worse than death." I found my voice, shaky but determined. What do you want us to do?" The cat's eyes glowed brighter. "Find my bones. Bury them in consecrated ground. Only then will I be at peace." "And if we refuse?" Karen asked, her arm protectively around Sarah. A chilling laugh filled the room. "Then you'll watch as I take everything you love, piece by piece." To prove its point, Luna, no, Agatha, looked at Sarah's favorite doll. It burst into flames, turning to ash in seconds. Sarah screamed, burying her face in Karen's side. "You have 3 days," Agatha said. "Don't disappoint me." With that, Luna collapsed, looking once again like a normal cat. But we knew better now. We were trapped in a nightmare, with no clear way out. The next 3 days were a blur of frantic research and sleepless nights. We scoured local history books, old newspapers, anything that might give us a clue about Agatha's final resting place. All the while, strange things kept happening. Objects moving on their own, shadows where there shouldn't be any, and always, the feeling of being watched. On the second night, I woke to find Sarah missing from her bed. Panic gripped me as Karen and I searched the house. We found her in the attic, sleepwalking, muttering about an old well in the woods. It was our first real lead. The next day, we ventured into the forest behind our neighborhood. Sarah led the way, as if guided by an unseen force. Luna followed, her eyes gleaming with anticipation. Hours passed. Just when we were about to give up, we found it. An old, overgrown well hidden among the trees. And there, at its base, a small mound of earth that looked recently disturbed. We started digging, our hands shaking with fear and exhaustion. As the sun began to set, we uncovered them. Bones. Human bones. Ancient and fragile. Luna meowed, the sound almost triumphant. We carefully gathered the remains, wrapping them in a blanket we'd brought. But our ordeal wasn't over. We still had to bury them in consecrated ground. The nearest church was miles away, and we had less than an hour until midnight, the end of our third day. We ran. Through the darkening woods, across fields, our lungs burning. Luna raced ahead, guiding us, or perhaps leading us into a trap. We couldn't be sure of anything anymore. We reached the church with minutes to spare. The graveyard gate was locked. I boosted Karen over, then Sarah. As I climbed, I felt something grab my ankle. Looking down, I saw a skeletal hand emerging from the earth, trying to pull me back. I kicked free, tumbling over the gate. Together, we raced to an empty corner of the graveyard. We dug frantically, the sound of our labored breathing mixing with an unearthly howl that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Just as the church bell began to toll midnight, we lowered the bones into the hole and covered them. Luna let out a yowl that turned into a woman's scream. A blinding light erupted from the grave, forcing us to shield our eyes. When we looked again, Luna was gone. In her place stood the translucent figure of an old woman, Agatha. She smiled, not unkindly, and whispered, "Thank you." Then she faded away, leaving us alone in the silent graveyard. We made our way home in a daze, unsure if what we'd experienced was real. But the proof was there, in the empty cat bed, in Sarah's peaceful sleep, in the quiet that settled over our house. We had survived the curse of the black cat. But as I sit here, writing this, I can't shake the feeling that our brush with the supernatural has changed us forever. And sometimes late at night, I still hear the faint echo of a cat's meow, reminding me that the boundary between our world and the next is thinner than we'd like to believe. They say Halloween is when the veil between worlds is thinnest. I always thought that was just a spooky story to tell kids. But after what happened last October 31st, I'm not so sure anymore. My name is Mark, and I'm about to tell you about the night that changed everything I thought I knew about life, death, and the spaces in between. It started like any other Halloween. I was home alone, bowl of candy ready for trick-or-treaters. My wife was working late, and our kids were at a friend's party. The doorbell rang, and I opened it, expecting to see costumed children. Instead, I found myself face to face with emptiness. There was no one there, just a cold gust of wind that sent shivers down my spine. I was about to close the door when I heard it, a whisper, so faint I almost missed it. "Help me." I looked around, confused. The street was empty, no sign of any pranksters. Then I felt it, a presence right beside me. I couldn't see anything, but I knew, deep in my bones, that I wasn't alone. "Please," the voice came again, clearer this time. "I'm lost. I need to find my way home." My heart was racing. Was I going crazy, or was this really happening? Against my better judgment, I stepped outside, closing the door behind me. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Where are you?" A shimmer in the air like heat rising from pavement. Slowly, a figure began to take shape. A young woman, maybe in her 20s, with sad eyes and a confused expression. I don't know," she said. "I can't remember, but I know I don't belong here." I stood there, frozen, as she told me her story. How she woke up on this street with no memory of who she was or how she got there. How she'd been wandering for what felt like hours, unable to interact with anyone or anything, until she found me. "You're the first person who could hear me," she said, her voice filled with hope. "Can you help me find my way back?" Before I could answer, a blood-curdling scream tore through the night. It came from the house next door where the Johnsons lived. Without thinking, I ran towards the sound, the ghostly woman following close behind. The front door was open. Inside, I found Mrs. Johnson cowering in a corner, her eyes wide with terror. Standing over her was something. A dark, writhing mass of shadows, vaguely human-shaped but constantly shifting. "You," it hissed, its voice like nails on a chalkboard. "You killed me, left me to rot. Now it's your turn." I didn't understand what was happening, but I knew I had to do something. I grabbed the first thing I could find, a fireplace poker, and swung it at the shadow creature. It passed right through, the metal turning ice cold in my grip. The thing turned its attention to me, its form solidifying into that of a man I recognized from the news years ago. A homeless person who had frozen to death on the Johnsons' property. "This doesn't concern you," it growled. "Leave or share her fate." That's when the young woman stepped forward. "Stop," she said, her voice stronger now. "This isn't the way." The shadow man hesitated. You're like me, lost, forgotten." "Yes," she replied, "but hurting others won't bring us peace. It won't bring us home." As they talked, more shimmers appeared around us, more lost souls, drawn to the conflict, some angry, seeking vengeance like the shadow man, others confused, like the young woman. All of them lost, trapped between worlds. I stood there, overwhelmed, as the spirits shared their stories. A construction worker, killed in an accident and forgotten by his company. A child, victim of a hit-and-run driver who was never caught. An old woman who died alone with no one to mourn her. Their pain, their anger, their confusion, it filled the room, pressing down on me until I could barely breathe. But as they talked, something began to change. The anger started to fade, replaced by a shared sense of loss and longing. "We can't change what happened to us," the young woman said, "but we can choose what we do now. We can help each other find peace." One by one, the spirits began to glow, soft at first, then brighter, until they were almost too brilliant to look at. They started to fade, their forms becoming transparent. "Thank you," the young woman said to me, her smile radiant, "for listening, for caring. Sometimes that's all we need." And then they were gone. The room was empty except for me and Mrs. Johnson, both of us shaken to our core. As dawn broke, I sat on my porch, trying to make sense of what had happened. The world looked the same, but I knew it would never be the same for me again. I had glimpsed beyond the veil, seen the lost souls that walk among us. Now, every Halloween, I leave my porch light on all night. Not for trick-or-treaters, but for those other visitors. The lost souls who might need a kind ear, a moment of connection to find their way home. I've learned that the barrier between worlds isn't just thin on Halloween. It's thin wherever there's pain, wherever there's unfinished business. And sometimes, all it takes to help a lost soul find peace is to listen, to acknowledge their story. So if you ever feel a chill on a warm night, or hear a whisper when no one's around, don't be afraid. It might just be a lost soul, looking for a way home. And who knows, you might be the one to help them find it. As for me, I'll keep watching, keep listening, because now I know the night of lost souls isn't just one night a year. It's every night. And we, the living, have the power to help them find their way. All we have to do is open our hearts and listen. The old Miller farm had always given me the creeps. Something about that weathered scarecrow standing guard in the cornfield just didn't sit right. But I never imagined it would be the start of a nightmare that would consume our entire town. My name is Tom, and I'm about to tell you a story that'll make you think twice about those harmless-looking guardians of the harvest. It was 2 days before Halloween when I first noticed something was off. I was driving past the Miller farm on my way home from work when I saw it. The scarecrow had moved, not just fallen over or shifted in the wind, but actually changed position. Its arms were now outstretched, as if reaching for something, or someone. I tried to shake it off, tell myself I was imagining things, but that night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that scarecrow, its burlap face somehow twisted into a sinister grin. The next morning, I mentioned it to my wife, Sarah. She laughed it off, saying I was getting into the Halloween spirit, but I could see the worry in her eyes. She'd grown up in this town, and she knew the stories about the Miller farm. Old Man Miller had been a strange one, they said. A recluse who rarely left his property. Some folks whispered about odd lights in his fields at night, about crops that grew unnaturally fast, but no one ever had any proof. When he died, the farm was left to rot, that lone scarecrow the only remnant of its former life. As Halloween approached, more people started noticing strange things. Livestock going missing, weird noises coming from the cornfield at night, and always that scarecrow watching over it all. On Halloween night, I decided to investigate. I know, stupid move. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong, and I had to know what. I waited until Sarah fell asleep, then grabbed a flashlight and headed out to the Miller farm. The night was unusually still. No wind, no animal sounds, just an eerie silence that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. As I approached the cornfield, I saw it. The scarecrow was gone from its post. My heart started racing. I swept my flashlight across the field, searching for any sign of movement. That's when I heard it. A rustling in the corn, getting closer. I turned to run, but my foot caught on something. I fell hard, the breath knocked out of me. As I gasped for air, I saw what had tripped me. A hand. A human hand, sticking out of the earth. Panic gave me strength. I scrambled to my feet and ran, the sound of something large moving through the corn right behind me. I didn't stop until I reached my car, slamming the door shut just as a figure emerged from the field. It was the scarecrow, but not like any scarecrow I'd ever seen. It moved with a jerky, unnatural gait, its burlap head cocked to one side, and its eyes were alive, glowing with a sickly green light. I sped home, my mind reeling. What had I seen? What was buried in that field? I burst into the house calling for Sarah, but she wasn't there. Instead, I found a note. Gone to help at the Halloween festival. Join me when you can. The festival. Half the town would be there, including all the kids trick-or-treating, and it was being held right next to the Miller farm. I raced to the festival grounds, desperate to warn everyone. But as I arrived, I realized I was too late. The scarecrow was there, standing motionless in the middle of the crowd. People were gathered around it, laughing, taking pictures, thinking it was part of the Halloween decorations. I tried to shout a warning, but my voice was drowned out by the festivities. That's when the scarecrow moved. Its head snapped towards me, those glowing eyes locking onto mine. And then it spoke, its voice like dry leaves scraping against stone. You shouldn't have pried, Tom, it said. Now everyone will pay the price. Chaos erupted. The scarecrow's arms stretched out, impossibly long, grabbing people left and right. The ground began to shake and more hands burst from the earth. Hands like the one I'd seen in the field. People were screaming, running in all directions. I searched frantically for Sarah, finally spotting her helping a group of children escape. I ran to her, grabbing her hand. "We have to get out of here," I yelled over the noise. But Sarah pulled away. "We can't leave them," she said, gesturing to the terrified people around us. She was right, of course. We couldn't just save ourselves. So we stayed, helping as many as we could to safety. As the night wore on, we learned the horrible truth. Old Man Miller hadn't been growing crops all those years. He'd been growing something far more sinister. The scarecrow was his creation, a guardian to protect his twisted harvest of human suffering. Each Halloween, when the veil between worlds was thinnest, the scarecrow would come to life, feeding on the fear and pain of its victims to sustain itself for another year. And now, disturbed from its slumber, it was hungry for more than just a yearly feast. We fought back, of course. The whole town united against the horror in our midst. But even as we battled, we knew this was just the beginning. The scarecrow had awakened something dark and ancient, something that had been sleeping beneath our feet all along. Now, as I sit here recording this, I can see the scarecrow's post from my window. It stands empty for now, but I know better than to believe it's over. Come next Halloween, we'll be ready. We have to be. Because if we fail, the harvest of horror will spread beyond our little town, and God help us all if that happens. So remember, the next time you see a scarecrow standing watch over a quiet field, ask yourself, what is it really guarding, and what might happen if it ever decides to leave its post? We hope you enjoyed this chilling tale. If it sent shivers down your spine, give us a thumbs up and share your thoughts in the comments below. What was your favorite part? Don't forget to subscribe for more spine-tingling stories and hit that notification bell so you never miss a scare. Until next time, stay spooky and remember, sometimes the darkest shadows hide the most terrifying secret.